The blood on the stranger's cuff was already freezing when Clara saw the bus ticket trembling in his hand. He sat beneath the cracked shelter light, shoulders folded inside a soaked black coat, one shoe resting in a shallow ribbon of dirty water. Rain hammered the plexiglass roof. Every passing car sprayed cold mist across the bench, carrying the sharp smell of gasoline and wet asphalt. Clara slowed. The pharmacy bag she should have been carrying was still waiting 3 blocks away. In her pocket, a folded $20 bill pressed against her fingertips. It was all she had until Friday. Her mother's prescription cost $19 and change. The stranger lifted his head. He looked young, too young for the exhaustion carved beneath his eyes. A narrow cut crossed his temple, and his knuckles were scraped raw, but he kept watching the street instead of his wounds. "Are you waiting for someone?" Clara asked. "For the bus." His voice was low and hoarse. The departure board flickered above him. The final route out of the city was due in 7 minutes. Clara noticed the ticket in his hand was only a schedule torn from the station wall. "That won't get you on." His jaw tightened. "I know." Headlights swept across the shelter. He flinched before the vehicle passed, then hid the movement by wiping rain from his face. Clara heard the metallic rattle of the bench as his hand closed around its edge. "Do you need a hospital?" "No, too fast." He rose, but his knees nearly gave way. Clara caught his sleeve. The wool felt heavy with rain, cold enough to sting her palm. He pulled away without striking her, then looked toward the approaching bus. His brakes hissed at the curb. Warm yellow light spilled over the pavement. The driver opened the door and called, "Last run. Fare or pass." The stranger searched his empty pockets once, though both of them knew there was nothing there. Clara touched the 20 in her coat. She pictured the pharmacy counter, the amber bottle, her mother coughing into a dish towel so Clara would not hear. The bus engine growled impatiently. She could walk away. She should. Instead, Clara stepped toward the fare box and held out the bill. "1 ticket as far as this takes him." The stranger stared at her. "You don't know me. That isn't the same as knowing you don't need help. I can't pay you back. I didn't ask you to." The driver tore off a ticket and returned a few coins. Clara pushed both into the stranger's chilled hand. His fingers closed around them slowly, as if no one had given him anything without demanding more. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated while the open doors breathed warm diesel air between them. "Adrian." "Then get on the bus, Adrian." He climbed the first step, stopped, and looked back at the empty pharmacy bag tucked beneath her arm. His gaze dropped to her bare hand, finally understanding that the money had not been spare. "Why?" Clara met his eyes through the rain streaking the glass. "When you can, help someone else." The doors folded shut. Adrian remained standing in the aisle as the bus pulled away, one hand pressed to the window and the $20 ticket clenched in the other. Clara watched the red taillights disappear, then turned toward home without the medicine. Behind the fogged glass, Adrian carefully flattened the worn bill the driver had returned as change, and read the name printed on Clara's bakery apron. The brass bell above the bakery door gave one tired chime, nearly swallowed by the hiss of rain against the windows. It was 10 minutes before closing, and the display case held 6 unsold rolls beneath cold fluorescent light. Clara stood behind the counter, scraping dried dough from her knuckles, while the refrigerator compressor rattled beneath a red notice marked Final Warning. A black car waited at the curb. Its engine purred low enough to vibrate the glass. The man who entered wore a charcoal coat darkened at the shoulders by rain. 2 figures remained outside, motionless beneath the awning, but he crossed the worn tile alone. 8 years had sharpened Adrian's face and straightened his posture. The injured stranger was gone. In his place stood the man whose photograph appeared beside words people lowered their voices to say. Clara recognized him before he removed his gloves. Not from the newspapers. From the way he paused beside the door, as though some part of him still expected the last bus to leave without him. "We're closed," she said. Adrian's gaze moved over the empty shelves, the aging oven, and the envelope from the landlord beside the register. Then he looked at her apron. The bakery's name remained stitched across it, though the thread had faded to gray. I know. His voice was quiet. Everyone outside seemed to listen anyway. He set a narrow glass frame on the counter. Inside lay a worn $20 bill, its corners softened, a pale crease running through Andrew Jackson's face. The change from a bus ticket, preserved for 8 years. Rainwater slid from Adrian's sleeve and tapped against the glass. I owe you everything. Clara's fingers stopped against the metal scraper. The oven fan clicked off, leaving only rain, refrigeration, and Adrian's measured breathing. She lifted the frame. A small notation had been written beneath the bill. Last bus. Clara, you kept it. It was the first thing anyone gave me that came without a chain attached. Adrian placed a cream envelope beside it. The paper was thick, heavy. Clara did not touch it. What is that? Enough to clear your rent, replace the oven, and keep this place open. Then take it back. For the first time, the two men outside shifted. Adrian did not. You haven't opened it. I don't need to count a chain to know what it weighs. His jaw tightened, but his hands remained flat on the counter. This isn't ownership. Then why did you arrive with guards? Clara pushed the envelope toward him. Why is there a car outside worth more than this building? Why does everyone on this block know your name but nobody says it above a whisper? Adrian looked through the rain-streaked window. At once, the figures beneath the awning stepped away from the entrance. A small command. Absolute obedience. Because I survived long enough to become someone people fear. That doesn't make your money mine. Clara slid the framed bill back, but Adrian caught its edge before it crossed the counter. Neither pulled. The glass felt cold between their hands. You needed medicine that night, he said. I saw the pharmacy bag. And you needed a way out. You went home without it. Clara released the frame. What happened after that was my responsibility. What happened after you boarded that bus was yours. The red notice fluttered when the heater coughed warm, dusty air across the counter. Adrian glanced at it once. They're closing you in 9 days. Clara folded the notice and tucked it beneath the register. Then I have 9 days. She picked up his envelope and placed it against his chest. He accepted it slowly. The refusal seemed to weigh more than the money inside. If you believe you owe me, she said, do what I asked you to do. Help someone who cannot repay you. Adrian studied her beneath the buzzing lights. Then he returned the framed bill to the counter, turned, and walked into the rain with the envelope still sealed in his hand. The black car pulled away. Silence settled over the bakery. Clara reached for the frame and found a business card beneath it. No phone number, no title, only Adrian's name and a handwritten sentence on the back. I heard you, but I will not watch them take this place from you. Cold blue light leaked through the bakery windows when a white envelope slid beneath the front door. The paper rasped across the tile and stopped beside Clara's flour-dusted shoe. Inside was a receipt stamped paid in full. The building's mortgage, overdue taxes, and every late fee had been transferred to a private holding company before dawn. At the bottom, beneath an unfamiliar corporate name, one line appeared in clean black type. No eviction action will proceed. Clara called the bank. Then the county clerk. By noon, the bitter smell of burned coffee filled the kitchen, and both had confirmed the same thing. Someone had purchased the debt. She locked the bakery early, slipped Adrian's business card into her coat, and followed the address embossed along its edge. His office occupied the top floor of a limestone building where the lobby smelled of cedar and polished brass. Men in dark suits watched her cross the marble, but Clara did not slow. She pushed through the double doors without knocking. Adrian stood beside a rain-streaked window, his jacket folded over a chair. You bought my building. It was not a question. He dismissed the two men near his desk with a glance. The doors closed behind them with a soft, expensive click. I bought the debt, he said. There's a difference. Not to the person who owes it. Clara placed the receipt on his desk. The paper looked painfully small against the black wood. You offered money. I refused. So you hid it behind a company. In 9 days, they would have changed the locks. Then I would have fought them for 9 days. And lost. The radiator whispered beneath the window. Clara leaned forward, palms flat on the cool desk. You don't get to turn my no into a problem your money can erase. Adrian's jaw tightened. I kept them from taking what belongs to you. No. You made yourself the man who decides whether I keep it. Silence pressed against the glass. Far below, tires hissed over wet pavement. Adrian picked up a fountain pen, but Clara placed 2 documents beside his hand. A repayment agreement she had written herself and a tenant protection clause requiring the debt holder to keep the bakery's lease unchanged. Sign those. His eyes moved over the pages. You cannot afford these payments. Then extend the term. Reduce the interest. Treat me like a debtor, not a possession. I never said you were mine. You didn't have to. You bought the ground under my feet. The pen stopped between his fingers. For the first time since entering, Clara saw no command in his face. Only calculation meeting a boundary it could not purchase. Adrian crossed out the interest line, replaced it with 0, and signed both pages. Clara took the pen and restored a modest rate. Charity has no strings, she said. A debt does. I choose the debt. She signed, tore off his copy, and walked toward the door. Clara. His voice held no order now. She looked back. Adrian stood alone behind the desk, the agreement in one hand. What am I allowed to do? Clara opened the door. Cold air swept in from the corridor. Ask. Then she left him with a power he had never learned to use, and a word no one in his city had ever required from him before. By noon, the bell above the bakery door had not rung once. Rain ticked against the glass, the ovens breathed dry heat into the empty room, and 6 untouched loaves cooled beneath the yellow display lights. Across the street, a woman lowered her umbrella, saw the black sedan at the curb, and kept walking. Clara stared at Adrian's driver through the fogged window. Adrian had sent him that morning after someone painted Mafia bread across the brick wall. No threats, no violence, just a silent man in a dark coat, standing where every neighbor could see him. By evening, 2 catering orders had been canceled. The next morning, a supplier left flour on the sidewalk rather than enter. Take your protection away, Clara told Adrian over the phone. His paws carried the faint hiss of tires on wet pavement. Someone marked your building, and you marked me as yours by guarding it. I was keeping you safe. You were making everyone afraid to stand beside me. The sedan disappeared within an hour. The damage did not. For 5 days, the cash register remained silent while bread hardened on the shelves. Clara sold her small gold earrings to cover electricity, then spent the remaining money on beans, onions, and paper bowls. On Saturday, she rolled the display cases against the wall and dragged 3 folding tables onto the sidewalk. Wind snapped at her apron. Steam rose from 2 stock pots, carrying the smell of rosemary and warm bread down the block. A handwritten sign hung above them. Free community kitchen. No questions. The first person to stop was an elderly man with rainwater dripping from his cap. Clara placed soup and half a loaf in his hands. Then came a mother with 2 children, a delivery driver, 3 tenants from upstairs. By sunset, neighbors were bringing carrots, canned tomatoes, coffee, and clean blankets. The woman who had crossed the street earlier returned with a tray of cornbread. I heard this place belonged to him, she said. Clara wiped flour from her wrist. The building debt does. This kitchen belongs to whoever feeds someone. The woman set down the tray. Then move over. Metal spoons struck bowls. Children laughed beneath the awning. For the first time that week, the bell above the door rang until its thin brass voice became part of the noise. Adrian arrived after dark without an escort. His tailored coat caught silver drops beneath the street lamp, but he stopped at the curb as if an invisible line had been drawn there. Clara saw him. She did not invite him closer. Instead, she handed an empty soup pot to a teenager and pointed toward the sink. Adrian watched strangers repair what his protection had broken. Then he crossed the street alone. May I help? He asked. Clara placed a towel in his hands. Dry the bowls. No one moved aside for him. No one bowed. He stood beneath the fluorescent kitchen lights, sleeves rolled back, drying chipped ceramic one piece at a time. Near closing, the same flour supplier entered carrying a 50-pound sack on his shoulder. "Delivery," he said, avoiding Adrian's eyes. The boycott had cracked. But when Clara locked the door, Adrian remained beside the darkened counter. Rainwater gleamed on the floor between them. "They punished you because of my name," he said. "And they came back because of my actions." Clara took the towel from his hand. His fingers did not release it immediately. "Tell me what it costs," Adrian said quietly. "To make my name stop hurting you." Clara looked through the window at the black paint still staining the brick. "More than money." The refrigerator compressor rattled beneath the quiet bakery, and the last fluorescent tube hummed above a counter dusted with flour. Adrian had gone, but the question he left behind still seemed to occupy the room. Clara reached for the towel he had used and found a small leather notebook beneath it. Its cover was cracked, its pages swollen from old rain. She carried it to Adrian's office the next morning. Cold sunlight cut across the black marble floor, catching on the brass corners of his desk. "You left this." Adrian looked at the notebook but did not touch it. "I thought I'd lost it 8 years ago." "Then open it." His thumb moved over the warped cover. Inside were dates, addresses, and expenses written in the tight hand of someone who had once counted every cent. The first entry stopped Clara's breath. Last bus west. Ticket, $17.50. Coffee, $2. Pay phone, 50 cents. Total, $20. Beneath it, one sentence had been pressed so hard into the paper that the ink marked 3 pages. "Find Elias Ward before they find me." Rain clicked against the windows. Somewhere beyond the door, a phone rang twice and went silent. "Who was Elias Ward?" Clara asked. Adrian closed the notebook. "The only man who saw who opened the warehouse gate that night. My family believed I betrayed them. Elias could prove I didn't." The bus ticket had not simply carried him away from danger. It had carried him toward the truth. "Did you find him?" "For 9 minutes. Adrian's jaw tightened. "He gave me enough to survive the accusation, not enough to name the real traitor. Then he disappeared." Clara looked again at the arithmetic. Her mother's prescription had cost exactly $20. For years, Clara had remembered only the empty pharmacy bag in her hand and the cold walk home. Now she could see the road splitting beyond that bus station. One path ending at her mother's bedside, the other carrying a wounded stranger toward the single voice that could preserve his future. Adrian slid the notebook into a drawer. "This is not your burden." Clara pulled the drawer open again. The metal runners scraped sharply through the room. "You don't get to decide that for me. Elias vanished because standing near me was dangerous. And you've been searching with men who make frightened people hide." Clara took out her phone. "I know how to ask without sounding like a threat." By noon, she had closed the bakery for half a day and spread copies of the notebook's old addresses across a flour-streaked work table. She called shelters, church kitchens, and county assistance offices. Not as Adrian's representative, but as the woman who had spent years remembering faces across a counter. She offered no money, no pressure, only Elias's name and a promise that he could answer through an attorney. At 4:17, the bakery phone rang. The scent of cooling bread hung heavy in the warm kitchen as Clara listened to a shelter coordinator from Pennsylvania describe an older man who never used his full surname and still flinched at black cars. "He left 6 months ago," the woman said, "but he receives mail through us." Clara wrote down the forwarding contact. Adrian stood on the other side of the table, silent. For once, all his power had nowhere to go. Clara tore the page free and held it out, but kept her fingers on the paper. "We do this my way. No guards, no threats, no one follows him." Adrian met her eyes. "And if he refuses? Then we respect it." She released the address into his hand. "But I'm going to ask him myself." The old notebook had answered what her $20 had bought. The new address raised a harder question. After 8 years of hiding, what truth would Elias Ward demand Clara risk before he agreed to speak? Rain ticked against the dark windows of Adrian's office, soft as fingernails on glass. Beyond them, harbor cranes stood beneath white floodlights, their steel arms cutting through the fog. Adrian had just folded Elias Ward's forwarding address into his wallet when the private phone on his desk began to vibrate. Clara was already on her way home, alone, exactly as she had demanded. "The East Pier," a man said when Adrian answered. "Midnight, unless you want the baker's trip to Pennsylvania to end before it begins." The line went dead. At 11:58, Adrian entered an abandoned customs warehouse near the water. No guards followed him. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and wet concrete. Somewhere outside, a cargo chain struck a mast with a hollow metallic rhythm. 3 men waited beneath a hanging work lamp. The one in the center slid a folder across a rusted table. Inside were photographs of Clara leaving the bakery, unlocking her apartment building, and carrying groceries through the rain. None showed an attack. They did not need to. "She found Ward," the rival said. "That makes her part of your family's unfinished business." Adrian closed the folder. Carefully. "She is not part of anything." "Then remove her from it." A transfer agreement followed the photographs. It surrendered Adrian's controlling interest in the harbor terminals, the shipping contracts attached to them, and the loyalty of every crew whose wages passed through those docks. Most of his empire rested on those pages. The rival placed a black pen beside them. "Sign, and her name disappears from every list. Her bakery, her mother, her trip, untouched." Adrian looked through the dirty window. Containers rose and fell beyond the glass. Red and blue boxes moving through the kingdom he had spent 8 years building. Men feared him because he controlled what entered the city and what never left it. Clara had once spent everything she possessed to give him a way out. Now his way of protecting her was to give up the very thing that made others obey. "I want the photographs destroyed," he said. "Every copy. After the transfer clears." "Before." The rival smiled. Adrian remained standing. No raised voice. No threat. Only silence, sharpened until the other man's smile faded. A metal waste bin was pulled forward. The photographs curled over a blue flame, their glossy surfaces blistering before collapsing into ash. Adrian read every page. Then he signed. The harbor did not announce its change of ruler. No sirens sounded. But by 12:17 a.m., his access codes failed, his shipping accounts were frozen, and the cranes beyond the warehouse windows began moving under someone else's orders. Adrian placed the pen on the table. "If anyone goes near her, the agreement dies. You no longer have enough power to enforce that." Adrian buttoned his coat. "Then hope I never have to prove what remains." At dawn, Clara found him outside the bakery without a car or an escort. Cold rain darkened his shoulders. He carried 2 coffees and said nothing about the harbor. When she asked whether he was ready for Pennsylvania, he nodded and held the door while she gathered her notes. Across the street, a black sedan pulled away from the curb. Adrian watched it disappear in the bakery window, his reflection divided by streaks of rain. He had bought Clara time with most of his empire. What he could not know was whether the men who accepted his sacrifice intended to honor it. The heater in the Pennsylvania shelter clicked without warmth, while wet coats filled the narrow office with the smell of wool and highway rain. Clara sat across from Elias Ward beneath a buzzing fluorescent tube. Adrian remained by the door, exactly where she had told him to stand. No guards, no threats. Elias's hands trembled around a paper cup. "I kept the originals because I knew they'd bury me with the copies," he said. From a canvas mail pouch, he removed shipping manifests, payment ledgers, and a sealed statement bearing his faded notary stamp. The records proved Adrian had never betrayed his family. The orders had come from inside his own organization, signed through accounts controlled by the advisor who had stood beside him for 8 years. The same man now commanding the harbor terminals. Adrian reached for the ledger. Clara covered it with her palm. "No," his jaw tightened. "Those are my people. That's why you don't get to handle this your way." Elias confirmed every date into Clara's phone recorder, including the night Adrian had been framed and the payments used to silence witnesses. When he finished, the room held only the hiss of the radiator and rainwater dripping from Adrian's coat. Clara called a Pennsylvania attorney she had contacted before leaving home. By noon, notarized copies were moving through 3 separate courier services. Digital scans went to 2 investigative reporters and the district attorney's public corruption unit. Clara attached one condition: everything had to be released simultaneously. Adrian stared through the shelter window at a parking lot glazed silver with rain. If you publish those files, my enemies lose their shield. So do you. He turned. Clara slid another folder across the desk. Inside were records bearing Adrian's own authorization, payoffs, shell companies, coerced contracts. Not the betrayal, but the empire built afterward. I could remove those pages, the attorney said through the speakerphone. Clara looked at Adrian. She remembered him drying bowls in her bakery, accepting instructions no one else dared give him. Then the truth becomes another favor bought for him. Adrian's fingers rested on the folder's edge. For one breath, the most feared man in the city could have stopped her. Instead, he pushed it back. Release all of it. At 3 p.m., phones began vibrating across the shelter office. The advisor's name appeared on every major news site beside copies of Elias's testimony. Within minutes, loyal captains abandoned the planned internal purge. Bank transfers froze, attorneys withdrew, and the men preparing to remove Adrian began turning on the traitor among them. The bargain at the harbor had not protected Clara. Exposure did. But Adrian's victories, crimes, and hidden machinery now filled those same headlines. His feared name was no longer armor. It was evidence. Outside, camera vans rolled through the rain, their white lights washing the shelter windows. Adrian's phone rang once. A federal prosecutor spoke for less than 30 seconds. When the call ended, Clara saw his reflection in the black screen. They offered me one chance to cooperate, he said. And if you refuse? Blue lights flickered across the wet ceiling. Adrian looked down at the old ledgers, then toward the approaching doors. By tomorrow night, I either reclaim everything or surrender it. Rain hammered the courthouse annex windows while fluorescent light bled across a steel table, turning every folder the color of ash. The federal prosecutor placed a cooperation agreement beside Adrian's phone. One signature gives us the network, he said. One phone call gives it back to you. Adrian stared at the screen. Messages from captains who had abandoned the purge stacked beneath one another, offering men, money, and the harbor terminals the traitor had seized. All they wanted was permission. Clara stood near the door, her damp coat smelling of rain and bakery smoke. She did not reach for him. She did not tell him what to choose. Adrian unlocked the phone and called his remaining captains. Close every account, he said. Release every employee from obligation. No retaliation. No successor. Silence hissed through the speaker. Then a voice warned that the organization would fracture without him. That is the point. He ended the call before anyone could turn obedience into negotiation. Next came the records. Shipping manifests, shell companies, payment books, coded contracts, names that had once opened locked doors. Adrian slid each file across the cold table. The prosecutor checked them against a list while an old radiator knocked behind the wall. With every marked page, Adrian surrendered something more permanent than the docks. Routes, leverage, silence. The machinery that had made an entire city lower its voice was becoming evidence under white government lights. A final document waited beneath the others. Consent to dissolve the remaining companies and forfeit assets tied to criminal operations. Adrian's pen hovered once. Not almost. Not long enough for rescue. Then ink scratched across the paper. The prosecutor collected the folders and removed Adrian's phone. Federal agents will take you through the east exit, he said. Cooperation may reduce what happens next. It does not erase it. Adrian nodded. I'm not asking it to. When the door shut, the room seemed larger and colder. Clara approached the table. For 8 years, men had measured Adrian by what he controlled. Now his hands were empty except for a faint blue stain from the pen. I can't ask you to wait, he said. Good. Clara replied. The rain traced silver lines down the glass between them and the city beyond. Because I won't promise that. His jaw tightened, but he did not look away. Clara set her palm over the ensigned visitor pass lying between them, holding it still beneath the radiator's dry breath. If you come back, Adrian, come back with a name that doesn't make people afraid. Boots sounded in the corridor. The latch turned. Adrian stepped toward the agents without guards, weapons, or orders left to give. At the threshold, he looked back once. Clara remained beside the steel table, not waiting, not following, but leaving him one road no empire could purchase. The door closed, and for the first time, the question was not whether Adrian could survive without power. It was whether he could become someone Clara would freely choose if he ever returned. The bell above the bakery door rang once beneath the hush of midnight rain. Cold air swept across the worn tile, carrying the smell of wet pavement and fresh bread. Clara looked up from the flour-dusted counter. A man stood beneath the amber light with rain darkening the shoulders of his plain wool coat. No guards waited behind him. No black car idled at the curb. Adrian held only a leather folder and the same careful stillness she remembered from the federal annex. Years had carved silver into his hair and softened nothing about his gaze. But when two customers passed the window, they did not hurry. They did not lower their eyes. "My name is Adrian," he said, almost testing how little fear it carried. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. "I know." He crossed the room and set the folder on the counter. Inside were incorporation papers for a foundation supporting homeless shelters, emergency bus fares, medical care, and job placement. Every dollar came from the legal assets that remained after restitution, forfeiture, and the years he had spent answering for his crimes. Clara's name appeared only once, as the person with complete authority over the fund. Adrian retained no veto, no private account, no power to redirect a cent. "You built this without controlling it," she said. Rain whispered against the glass. The old refrigerator hummed behind her. "I had to learn the difference between giving someone help and buying a place in their life." He slid a narrow frame from his coat and placed it beside the papers. Beneath the glass lay the faded $20 bill he had carried for years, its creases flattened but still visible. "I owe you everything." Clara studied the bill, then the man who had once mistaken gratitude for a claim. With one firm motion, she opened the frame. The tiny metal clips clicked against the counter. She lifted the bill, folded it along its oldest crease, and pressed it into his palm. "Then don't repay me," she said. "Continue what I started." His fingers closed around it. Not tightly, carefully. Clara signed the foundation papers, granting herself responsibility rather than accepting a gift, then turned the front door placard from closed to open. Across the street, beneath the awning of a shuttered pharmacy, a soaked man huddled beside a duffel bag. Adrian followed her gaze. He walked outside without waiting for permission, crossed through the rain, and crouched far enough away not to frighten the stranger. After a brief conversation, he returned for hot coffee, bread, and the address of a shelter funded to keep beds open after midnight. When the stranger boarded a city bus, Adrian came back dripping onto the tile. "Is there anything else?" he asked. Clara moved from behind the counter and unlocked the small apartment door beside the ovens. Warm light spilled across his wet shoes. She held out her hand, not for payment, and not because she owed him mercy. "Stay." Adrian took it. Outside, the rain kept falling on a city that no longer belonged to him. Inside, Clara chose the man who had finally learned that love begins where dead ends.